Man angrily mocks black woman on plane, but he had no idea. Keanu Reeves was watching. It was an unusually tense flight, and the hum of the engines was the only sound that filled the air. Passengers shifted uneasily in their seats, a mix of excitement and irritation in the air. Among them, a black woman named Tasha sat with a focused expression, headphones in, trying to block out the world as much as possible. She was used to the occasional uncomfortable stare or whispered comment, but today felt different. Her instincts told her something was off even before she saw the man. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man with a self-assured demeanor sat, his face flushed with the remnants of a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was already muttering to himself, grumbling about the flight and the service. But when he glanced over at Tasha, something changed in his gaze. He didn't know it yet, but today would not go the way he had expected. With a scoff, he turned to his seatmate, a man who looked as though he'd rather be anywhere but next to this guy, and let out a few loud comments. "Can you believe this?" he asked, pointing at Tasha, though she wasn't looking. "A black woman sitting right in front of me, probably thinking she's better than everyone else. I've got to deal with this for the next few hours." His voice carried, and the words hung in the air like smoke. Tasha's fingers gripped the armrest, her heart beating a little faster, but she kept her cool. She had been through worse. But this was something different. The man continued, oblivious to her awareness. "I bet she's some kind of activist, thinking she's all enlightened or something, probably causing trouble wherever she goes." His words were acidic, laced with judgment and a false sense of superiority. Tasha remained calm, hoping the flight would pass without further incident. She closed her eyes and exhaled slowly, trying to center herself. But as the man grew louder, a ripple of unease swept through the cabin. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that there was someone on the plane who had been listening to every word. Someone who had seen the cruelty in his eyes and heard the judgment in his voice. Someone who wasn't about to let this go, unnoticed. That someone was none other than Keanu Reeves, sitting a few rows ahead, his gaze focused on the entire scene. Keanu, always the quiet observer, had seen it all. He wasn't the type to cause a scene, but when it came to standing up, for others he knew he couldn't just sit back and watch. He had witnessed the man's words, but now he was watching Tasha. He could see her composure, her quiet strength, and the way she was holding herself in the face of this injustice. But something else struck him too. This wasn't just about one woman. This was about the way society treated people like Tasha every single day. It was about all the unfairness and ugliness that had been allowed to fester for far too long. Keanu wasn't going to let this moment pass. He wasn't just going to be a bystander. He was going to stand up. As the man continued with his insensitive remarks, Keanu's face hardened with a resolve that was unlike anything he had shown before. He wasn't just a celebrity. He was a man of integrity, and in this moment, his integrity called for action. It wasn't about ego or pride. It was about righting a wrong, about making a difference in the lives of people who often went unseen and unheard. Tasha's patience was wearing thin, and she couldn't ignore the growing tension anymore. She had dealt with discrimination her whole life, and though she was strong, this was becoming too much. The man's voice was rising in anger, his insults becoming more personal and cutting, aimed directly at her. She had every right to stand up for herself. But part of her hoped the man would stop. Part of her hoped he would realize just how ignorant he was being. But he didn't stop. In fact, he was getting louder and more aggressive. "What's her problem?" he muttered to his seatmate, loud enough for everyone to hear. "People, like her, always think they deserve special treatment. She probably wants to be a martyr to make everyone feel sorry for her." Tasha's hand clenched into a fist, her nails digging into her palm. She felt the heat rising in her chest, but before she could say anything, a voice broke through the growing tension. "Excuse me." Keanu's calm voice rang out across the cabin, cutting through the man's rant. Everyone on the plane turned to look. Keanu stood up, his presence commanding the attention of every single person. "You should really watch what you're saying," he said, his voice steady but filled with authority. The man blinked, clearly taken aback by the interruption. "And who are you?" he scoffed, not realizing who he was speaking to. Keanu didn't flinch. "I'm someone who believes in respect. I'm someone who stands up for people when they need it most. And right now, you're disrespecting that woman. You're disrespecting all women and all people who've been judged by the color of their skin." The man opened his mouth to retort, but Keanu wasn't finished. "I've been watching you, and I've been watching her. She hasn't said a word. She's been taking it, taking your ignorance, your cruelty, your hatred, and she's kept her dignity. You think you're better than her? You think your words can tear her down?" Keanu's eyes locked with the man's, his gaze unwavering. "Well, you're wrong." The man looked around, now realizing that the entire plane had gone silent, all eyes on him. The tension was palpable. Keanu's words had struck a chord with everyone who was listening. The man shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his bravado starting to fade. "You need to apologize," Keanu said, his voice firm yet calm. "And you need to recognize that your words matter. They hurt. They can change the course of someone's day or their life." The man hesitated, his eyes darting between Keanu and Tasha, who still sat in her seat, composed but visibly shaken. There was a brief silence, as if the entire plane was holding its breath. And then with a resigned sigh, the man mumbled, "I'm sorry. It wasn't much. It wasn't even sincere. But it was enough." Tasha looked up at Keanu, her eyes filled with gratitude and surprise. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected anyone to intervene. She had expected to have to fight her own battle as she had done so many times before. But here was Keanu, standing up for her, standing up for all the people who had been silenced by ignorance. She didn't know how to respond. She wanted to thank him, to say something meaningful, but the words wouldn't come. So instead, she simply nodded, her lips curving into a small but genuine smile. Keanu offered a kind smile in return, and then he turned and returned to his seat, leaving behind a room full of stunned silence. As the flight continued, the mood had shifted. The earlier tension had dissipated, replaced by a quiet sense of unity. Passengers exchanged glances, some even nodding in approval of Keanu's actions. It was as if they had been reminded of something essential, that the power of kindness, of standing up for what's right, could change everything. Tasha, though still shaken, felt a sense of peace she hadn't expected. The events of the past hour had opened her eyes to something important. She wasn't alone. Not in the world, and not on this plane. Keanu's actions had shown her that there were still people who cared, and that gave her a renewed sense of hope. Keanu's voice still echoed in her mind, especially the part about dignity. She had learned to hold on to her own, even when others tried to take it away. But hearing someone else recognize her strength had meant more than she could have imagined. It reminded her of her worth. And as she glanced over at Keanu, who was now back in his seat, reading quietly, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. The world needed more people like him, people who saw the humanity in others, who refused to let the cruelty of a few define the many. The plane ride that had started with mockery and disrespect had ended in a quiet, powerful lesson in humanity. Tasha was grateful for that lesson, and as the plane descended toward its destination, she knew that she would carry it with her, wherever she went. Because kindness, like the air around her, could be the very thing that changed the world. The plane had landed, and the passengers slowly began to gather their belongings, murmuring softly to each other. But the air was different now. There was an unspoken bond between them all, a shared experience that would linger far beyond the confines of the flight. Tasha, still processing everything that had happened, slowly stood up from her seat. She was about to make her way to the exit when she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find the man who had mocked her earlier standing there, his face a little red, his posture stiff with embarrassment. "Hey, he began, his voice quieter than before. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Really. I didn't realize what I was saying. It was wrong." Tasha regarded him, For a moment, her expression neutral. She had no idea what to make of his apology. Was it sincere? Or was he just trying to save face? She had learned to be cautious with apologies, especially from people who had been so quick to judge. But then, something unexpected happened. The man seemed to genuinely struggle with his words. He took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers, with a vulnerability she hadn't anticipated. I was out of line. I don't know why I said what I said, but I do know that I was wrong. And I'm not proud of it. His voice cracked a little, the weight of his own guilt apparent. Tasha remained silent for a moment, allowing the gravity of the situation to settle in. This wasn't just an apology, it was an admission. The man wasn't trying to brush it off. He wasn't just apologizing to get out of an uncomfortable situation. He was acknowledging his mistake, and that, she realized, was the first step toward growth. Finally, Tasha nodded, her voice calm but firm. I appreciate the apology, she said, but it's not just about saying sorry. It's about understanding why what you said was wrong and learning from it. I hope you do. The man's face softened and he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I will, he promised. Thank you for showing me that. Tasha didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. Sometimes silence spoke louder than words, and in this moment her silence conveyed everything she needed to say. The man turned to leave and Tasha followed, stepping off the plane into the bustling airport terminal. As she walked toward the baggage claim, her mind wandered back to the earlier confrontation. She still couldn't quite believe it had happened. She had expected to handle things alone, to carry the weight of the injustice on her own shoulders, but instead, she had been seen, really seen, by someone who had the power to make a difference. Keanu had shown her that there was still hope in the world, that there were still people who would stand up for what was right. And now, as the airport crowd rushed around her, Tasha felt a little lighter, a little freer. The incident with the man on the plane had been a turning point for her. She wasn't just a passive victim of the world's injustices anymore. She had a voice. She had the right to stand up for herself. And more importantly, she had the right to expect better from others. As she picked up her luggage and walked toward the exit, she couldn't help but think about the future. The world was full of people who needed to learn the lessons that Keanu had so effortlessly shared. People who needed to understand that their words had power and that their actions could change lives. She hoped in some small way the man had learned that lesson. But even if he hadn't, she knew one thing for certain. Tasha had learned it. And that made all the difference. A week passed since the incident on the plane, and Tasha had almost put it behind her. Life, as it often does, carried on. She was back at work, back to her routine. But the feelings from that day, of standing up for herself, of seeing someone else stand up for her, still lingered in the back of her mind. She had found herself thinking about Keanu, about how effortlessly he had made the right choice in the moment. It had been a reminder that sometimes the simplest actions had the biggest impact, but she didn't expect to be reminded of that lesson again so soon. One afternoon, Tasha was walking out of a local coffee shop when she collided with someone coming around the corner. Both of them stumbled back, and the man quickly reached out to steady her. She looked up, ready to apologize for the mishap, when she realized she was looking straight into the face of the man from the plane. Her heart skipped a beat. "Oh," he said, his face flushed with surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here." Tasha blinked, confused for a moment. Then it hit her. This was the same man who had made her feel small just days ago. Her initial reaction was one of wariness. She didn't know what to expect from him. The apology on the plane had been unexpected, but it hadn't erased everything that had happened. But as she stared into his eyes, something in her softened. He didn't look the same. He wasn't wearing that arrogant smirk, nor was there any sign of the bravado that had fueled his words on the flight. Instead, he seemed vulnerable. "I didn't expect to run into you either," Tasha said, her voice cautious. The man scratched his head, clearly embarrassed. "Look, I know this is weird," he began, "but I've been thinking about everything that happened on that plane, and I need to tell you something." something more. Tasha's eyebrows furrowed, unsure of where this was headed. She had heard apologies before, but they weren't always as genuine as they seemed. "Go ahead," she said, crossing her arms. The man hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "When I was on that flight, I was drunk," he admitted, his eyes avoiding hers for a second. "I didn't even know what I was saying. I was angry, frustrated about my own life, and I took it out on you." He paused, his voice growing softer. "But after you called me out, after Keanu, I don't know. I saw myself in a way I never had before. I've been working on it, trying to be a better person." Tasha watched him closely, unsure whether to believe him. People didn't change overnight. She had learned that the hard way, but she also knew that everyone deserved a chance to prove they could do better. And sometimes people only realize their mistakes when confronted with their own actions. "So what now?" she asked, her tone steady, but not unkind. The man looked up at her, his expression sincere. "I just want to make amends. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I wanted you to know that I'm really sorry, and I'll work to make sure nothing like that ever happens again." Tasha thought for a moment, her heart conflicted. She had no obligation to accept his apology, no responsibility to let him into her life. But she knew one thing for sure. He wasn't asking for forgiveness to make himself feel better. He was asking because he realized the weight of his actions. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of something important. "I appreciate you saying that," Tasha said quietly, "but you've got to show it. Words are one thing. Actions are everything." The man nodded quickly, his eyes widening as if he understood the gravity of her words. "I will," he promised. And for the first time, Tasha believed him. "I'm working on it, every day, and I won't let you down." Tasha offered a small, tentative smile. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step. And for now, that was enough. She turned to leave, but then paused, turning back to him. "Take care of yourself," she said, and without waiting for a response, she walked away. As she left the coffee shop, Tasha couldn't help but reflect on how strange life was, how a single moment, a single encounter, could change everything. A part of her was still cautious. She wasn't ready to trust him completely, but she also knew that people had the capacity for growth, for change. And sometimes that change came from the most unexpected of places. The days that followed felt different for Tasha. Life seemed to shift in subtle ways, like the way the air changes before a storm. The man whose name she had learned was Michael had become a shadow in her thoughts. She hadn't expected to run into him again after their brief interaction at the coffee shop, and she hadn't expected that one conversation to spark something in her. The world didn't often offer second chances, and when it did, people usually weren't ready to embrace them. Yet Michael had. His apology had been genuine, and though Tasha wasn't quick to forgive, she had respected him for owning his mistakes. Still, the question lingered in her mind. Could people really change? Or was it just a matter of time before the mask came off and old habits resurfaced? It was a Saturday afternoon when she found herself walking through the park, the scent of fresh grass filling the air. She was lost in thought when her phone buzzed in her pocket. Tasha pulled it out, seeing a message from an unknown number. She hesitated before opening it, unsure of what to expect. To her surprise, it was Michael. "Hey Tasha, I hope you're doing well. I know it's been a few weeks, but I just wanted to let you know I've been volunteering at a local youth center. I want to do something real, something that matters. I just wanted to let you know in case you were wondering if I meant what I said." Tasha stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of how to feel. Was this real? Or was it just another attempt to make himself feel better? She'd seen people use charity work as a way to absolve themselves of guilt before, but then again, she had also seen people genuinely change. People who took action not just for themselves, but for the greater good. She decided to meet him. Not for him, but for herself. She needed to see if he was truly following through on what he had promised, or if he was simply trying to keep up appearances. Later that week, she made her way to the youth center where Michael had been volunteering. She had never been there before, but it wasn't hard to spot him when she entered. He was in the corner of the room, surrounded by a group of teenagers, leading a discussion about respect, about the power of words, about kindness. Tasha watched him for a few moments, observing how he interacted with the kids. It was clear that he wasn't just putting on a show. He was genuinely engaged, listening to their thoughts, encouraging them to think critically about the way they treated others. She felt a knot loosen in her chest. This wasn't just a one-time thing. Michael was doing the work. He was becoming the person he had promised to be. When the session ended, he noticed her standing by the door. A smile spread across his face, though there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "Tasha," he said, walking toward her. "I didn't expect you to come by." "I wanted to see for myself," she replied, her voice calm. "To see if this was real." Michael's face softened, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. "It is," he said finally. "I'm not perfect, but I'm trying. Every day." Tasha regarded him for a long moment, her mind racing with thoughts. She had expected to see a man who was still hiding behind his past mistakes, but instead she saw someone who was embracing the challenge of becoming better, of making real changes in his life. It was a humbling sight. "You're doing good work here," Tasha said, quietly, her voice filled with a sincerity that surprised even her. Michael's expression brightened and he gave her a small, grateful nod. "Thanks, Tasha. That means a lot." Tasha didn't know what the future held for Michael or for herself, but in that moment she realized something important. People could change, they could make mistakes, and they could learn from them. It wasn't always easy and it wasn't always fast, but change was possible. She had seen it with her own eyes. She turned to leave. Michael called out to her. "Hey Tasha, I really appreciate you giving me this chance. I know I'm not there yet, but I'm going to keep working on it, and I hope you'll keep checking in." Tasha smiled, her heart a little lighter than it had been before. "I will," she said, her voice steady and kind. "Take care, Michael." She walked out of the youth center, her steps feeling a little more purposeful than before. Maybe the world wasn't as broken as it seemed. Maybe people were capable of more than she had given them credit for. And maybe, just maybe, change started with one person daring to make the first move. The weeks following Tasha's visit to the youth center passed by quickly. Life had a way of moving fast, especially when she was caught up in her work, her personal projects, and the day-to-day. But every now and then, her thoughts would drift back to Michael. She had seen him again a few times volunteering at the center, always with that same earnest energy, always striving to make a difference. It was clear to her now that he was trying, really trying. Yet despite the progress he had made, there was still a part of her that remained cautious. She couldn't forget how he had treated her on the plane, how quickly he had let his anger and frustration spill out onto someone he didn't even know. People could change, sure, but change took time, and she wasn't sure she was ready to let him back into her life completely. It wasn't about forgiving him. It was about trust. Trust had to be earned. One afternoon, Tasha received a message from Michael. It was simple, just an invitation to come speak to the group of teenagers he had been working with. "I know you've been busy, but if you ever want to come by and share your thoughts with the kids, I think they'd really benefit from hearing from someone like you." No pressure, of course. Tasha hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that kind of interaction. She didn't want to get too close, didn't want to complicate things, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the back of her mind that maybe, just maybe, this could be a step towards something bigger. She had seen the work Michael was doing with the kids, and part of her wanted to contribute too. So, after some thought, she decided to accept his invitation. Few days later, she arrived at the youth center. As she walked through the door, she noticed that the atmosphere was different from her previous visit. The room was filled with laughter and energy. The kids were excited and eager to learn. She spotted Michael in the corner, speaking to a group of teenagers. When he saw her, his face lit up and he quickly excused himself to walk over to her. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice warm and welcoming. "I think they're really going to benefit from hearing your perspective." Tasha smiled, but there was still a part of her that felt uncertain. This wasn't about her, she reminded herself. It was about helping the kids, helping them see the world from a different point of view. She wasn't here to reopen old wounds. She was here to give back, to make a difference where it mattered. After a brief introduction, Tasha began speaking to the group. She didn't know exactly what to say, but the words came naturally. She talked about the importance of kindness, about how words could heal or hurt, how people needed to take responsibility for their actions, and how they had the power to create change in the world. She spoke from the heart, sharing personal experiences and lessons she had learned over the years. As she spoke, she noticed how the room grew quieter, how the kids were hanging on to every word. Michael was standing in the back, watching her with an expression of quiet admiration. When she finished, there was a moment of silence, and then one of the teenagers raised their hand. "How do you know when someone has really changed?" the girl asked, her voice filled with curiosity. Tasha thought for a moment, her eyes scanning the room. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she said, her voice thoughtful. "You can't always see it right away. But when you see someone who is actively trying, who is willing to put in the work, that's when you know. Change takes time, but it's worth waiting for." Michael nodded in the back of the room, and Tasha could see how much that message resonated with him. She hadn't expected to feel so connected to this group of kids, but in that moment, she realized that maybe, just maybe, her own experiences could help guide them. After the session ended, Michael approached her again. "You were great," he said with a genuine smile. "The kids really responded to what you said, and I think they'll carry that with them for a long time." Tasha smiled back, but there was something different in her expression this time. She had found a sense of purpose in this place, a sense of peace. It wasn't just about forgiving Michael or seeing his progress. It was about the bigger picture. It was about helping others, about being a part of something meaningful. And in that moment, Tasha realized that sometimes the hardest lessons weren't about forgiving others, but about trusting the process, trusting that change, no matter how slow, could be real. As she left the youth center that day, Tasha felt a sense of quiet fulfillment. She hadn't expected to feel so at ease, so hopeful about the future. But maybe that's what life was about, taking chances, allowing room for growth, and trusting that things would work out, even when the road ahead seemed uncertain. Days turned into weeks, and Tasha continued her visits to the youth center. She wasn't sure what had changed within her, but she could feel herself becoming more involved, more invested in the work Michael was doing. The kids at the center were opening up, sharing their stories, and she could see the impact her words had on them. Every visit brought a sense of fulfillment, but it wasn't just the kids who were changing. Tasha felt herself changing too. She had learned to soften her defenses, to trust people again, even when they had hurt her in the past. But what really stood out was Michael. He was still the same person he had been, but now there was something different about him. He wasn't just volunteering because he felt guilty or because it was the right thing to do. He was doing it because he genuinely wanted to make a difference. One evening, as Tasha was preparing to leave the center, she saw Michael sitting by himself, looking lost in thought. She hesitated for a moment, then walked over to him. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. Michael looked up, surprised, then smiled faintly. "Yeah, just thinking about everything, about how far I've come and how much further I have to go. It feels like a never-ending journey." Tasha sat down beside him. "I get that. Change isn't easy, and it's not always quick. But you're doing the work, and that's what matters." Michael nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I used to think change would be a single moment, like some big dramatic turning point. But now I see it's more about the small moments, the daily choices that add up over time." Tasha smiled. "Exactly. It's about being consistent, doing the right thing even when no one is watching. They sat in silence for a while, the noise of the youth center fading into the background. Tasha could sense that Michael was truly at peace with where he was, with who he was becoming. It was strange, but she found herself feeling proud of him. Proud of the man he was now. As the days went on, Tasha's own feelings evolved too. She had come to see Michael in a new light. The man who had once angered her on that plane was no longer the person she saw before her. He had done the work, he had put in the effort, and he had grown. But even more than that, he had earned her respect. And maybe, just maybe, there was a place for him in her life. She wasn't sure what that meant yet, but she knew that trust wasn't something that came easily. She would have to see for herself if this change was lasting. But she wasn't ready to shut him out. Not anymore. The next day, Tasha got a call from Michael. He asked if she wanted to join him for dinner, to catch up outside of the center. She wasn't sure what to expect, but something told her this wasn't about making amends. It was about genuine connection. She agreed. As they sat at a small table in a quiet restaurant that evening, Michael seemed more relaxed than she had ever seen him. The conversation flowed easily between them. They talked about their lives, their dreams, their regrets. And for the first time, Tasha allowed herself to be open, to let him in, just a little. Michael listened, really listened. And for the first time, she felt like she wasn't just speaking into the void, she was being heard. She realized that the walls she had built up around herself were still there, but they weren't as high as they used to be. Slowly, over the course of that dinner, she began to see that Michael wasn't just someone who had changed his actions. He had changed his heart. And in that moment, Tasha made a choice. She chose to trust him. Not completely, not all at once, but enough to give him a chance. A real chance. As they finished their meal and parted ways that evening, Tasha felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She didn't know where this new chapter would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, there was room for both of them in each other's lives. The next few weeks felt like a whirlwind. Tasha and Michael continued to build on their friendship, each meeting slowly peeling away the layers of doubt and hesitation that had clouded Tasha's heart. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, not because she was trying to find out whether Michael had truly changed, but because she genuinely enjoyed his company. He wasn't the man who had insulted her months ago. That person was gone. In his place was someone who cared, who listened, who was trying to do better, not just for himself, but for the people around him. One afternoon, Tasha arrived at the youth center early. She was hoping to catch Michael before the kids arrived for their session. As she walked through the entrance, she saw him standing near the door, deep in conversation with one of the volunteers. She paused for a moment, watching him interact with such ease, his presence calming the people around him. There was something about the way he carried himself now, something that made it hard to believe he had ever been the man who had acted out in anger. It wasn't just about what he had done. It was about who he was becoming. Michael noticed her standing there and waved her over. "Hey, you're early," he said with a grin. "I'm just talking to Sam about the schedule for next week." Tasha smiled and walked over. "No problem. I actually wanted to ask you something." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Sure. What's up?" "You've been doing this volunteer work for a while now. Do you ever get discouraged? I mean, it must be hard sometimes, right?" Tasha's voice held a quiet vulnerability. She knew what it was like to feel like you were doing everything right, only to see no immediate results. Michael paused for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Of course, there are days when I feel like I'm not doing enough. There are days when I wonder if this is really making a difference. But then I remember that change isn't something you see immediately. It's something that happens slowly over time. And even if I can make one person's life a little better, that's worth it." Tasha felt a swell of respect for him in that moment. She had been through similar struggles, questioning whether her own efforts were ever enough. But hearing Michael speak with such sincerity made her realize that sometimes the smallest efforts could lead to the biggest changes. That night, after the session ended, Michael and Tasha found themselves alone in the quiet of the center. The rest of the kids had gone home and the building was empty except for the two of them. There was a sense of calm in the air, a peace that neither of them had felt before. "Tasha," Michael said, his voice low, "I'm really glad you've been a part of this. You've helped me more than you know." Tasha smiled softly. "I'm glad I could be here. I've learned a lot too, about forgiveness, about trust, and about what it means to keep going even when you don't see the results." Michael nodded. "That's the key, right? Keep going." They stood in silence for a moment, just taking in the stillness of the room. There was no need for words, just a shared understanding. Tasha realized that she had found something valuable here, not just in Michael but in herself. She had learned to open up, to let people in, to trust again. And it was making all the difference. The next day, as she walked out of the center, she felt lighter than she had in a long time. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew that she was on the right path. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real. And sometimes, that was enough. She had come a long way since that fateful encounter on the plane. And as she looked back at the youth center, she realized that change wasn't just possible. It was happening, both in the lives of the kids at the center and in her own life. 2 months passed, and life seemed to fall into a steady rhythm. Tasha continued to work with Michael and the kids at the center. The bond she had once feared to rebuild had grown stronger with each passing day. The walls that had once surrounded her heart were now only faint echoes of what they had been. She had allowed herself to trust again, to open up to the possibility of change, both in others and herself. Michael's work had become more than just a job to him. It had become his purpose. Every day he poured his energy into helping others, learning from them just as much as they learned from him. The transformation he had undergone wasn't just about breaking free from the past. It was about embracing the future with a new perspective, one that valued growth over perfection. It was an ongoing journey, but it was one he was willing to take. One evening, Tasha was walking through the center when she saw Michael sitting alone in a quiet corner. His face was lit by the soft glow of the desk lamp, his eyes focused on a piece of paper in front of him. She walked over and sat beside him, her presence a comforting silence. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice soft. Michael looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said, his tone reflective, "about everything that's happened, and I realized something." Tasha raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "I realized that life doesn't really give us clear answers. Sometimes we have to create our own answers. We have to choose who we want to be every single day, and honestly, I'm just glad I'm able to make a difference in someone's life." Tasha smiled, touched by his words. "You already are. You've made a huge difference here. With the kids, with me, with everyone." Michael looked at her for a long moment, his gaze intense yet filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said quietly. "You've shown me what it really means to care, to be patient, and to be open to change. I owe a lot of this to you." Tasha felt a warmth in her chest, her heart swelling with a quiet pride. She had started this journey unsure of what the future held, but now she was able to look back and see how far they had both come. It wasn't just about forgiveness anymore. It was about growth, acceptance, and the willingness to keep going no matter how hard it got. Later that evening, as Tasha was preparing to leave, she paused at the door, looking back at the center one last time. She realized that this place, these people, had become her home. She wasn't just part of their journey. They were part of hers. They had shown her what it meant to rebuild, to heal, to trust. She had learned so much from them, lessons she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Michael had become more than just a man who had changed. He had become a reminder that people were capable of incredible transformation, not because of some grand gesture or moment, but because of the small, everyday choices they made. As she stepped out into the cool evening air, she smiled, knowing that she had found something beautiful in this messy, unpredictable life. And just like Michael, she had learned to keep going, no matter what. If you enjoyed the story, Make sure to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you never
miss out on new inspiring videos. Thank you for joining us on this journey. See you in the next one.